I never thought a gate could spark war. But the moment I installed mine, solid steel, locked tight, the HOA went ballistic. They claimed it violated community harmony. Harmony? These are the same people who fined a neighbor for planting tulips instead of approved shrubs. At first, it was letters, then threats, then a formal demand to unlock it for the good of the neighborhood. I refused. That gate wasn't just metal, it was my line in the sand. Then came the retaliation. Fines stacked up. My mailbox mysteriously disappeared. One morning, I found tire tracks across my lawn. But I didn't back down. I dug deeper, and what I discovered changed everything. A loophole, a forgotten clause, a way to flip the script so hard, the entire board would choke on their own rules. So I made a move no one saw coming. Now, they have to ask me for permission just to drive home. Want to know how I turned their petty power trip into my ultimate revenge? For the first few years, life in Willow Creek felt like a quiet dream. My wife and I had saved for nearly a decade to buy our home, a modest two-story with a wraparound porch and a view of the hills. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. We planted lemon trees in the backyard, hung wind chimes from the eaves, and waved to neighbors on our evening walks. The community was tidy, almost too tidy. Lawns trimmed to regulation height. Mailboxes matching down to the shade of beige. The HOA called it uniform excellence. I called it step forward with a smile. Still, we didn't mind. Rules were rules, and we followed them. We paid our dues, attended the occasional meeting, and even volunteered for the spring cleanup. Then came the gate. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple black iron gate across our driveway. We installed it after a string of late-night trespassers started using our property as a shortcut. One even left tire marks across our lawn. The gate gave us peace of mind. But apparently, it gave the HOA a headache. 3 days after installation, I got the first letter. Unapproved structure. Violation of community aesthetic. Immediate removal required. I thought it was a mistake. Surely they'd understand once I explained. I was wrong. At the next HOA meeting, the board barely let me speak. They cited Clause 14b, subsection 3, no barriers that impede visual continuity. I asked what that meant. They said it meant my gate had to go. I left that meeting with a pit in my stomach. Not just because of the gate, but because of the way they looked at me, like I'd broken some sacred code. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. Neighbors who used to wave stopped making eye contact. One woman crossed the street when she saw me coming. Then the fine started. $50, $100, $250, each one more aggressive than the last. I tried reasoning. I sent emails, made calls, even offered to paint the gate to match the community palette. No response. That's when I started digging. Into the bylaws. Into the property records. Into the very foundation of Willow Creek itself. And what I found wasn't just a loophole. It was a lever. A way to turn their own rules against them. But I didn't act right away. I waited. I watched. I let the tension build until the board made one final demand. Unlock the gate or face legal action. That was the moment everything changed. Because what they didn't know was that the road they all drove on, the one that ran past my house, the one they used to access the clubhouse, the pool, and the tennis courts, wasn't technically theirs. It was mine. The fines didn't stop. They multiplied. Every week, a new envelope arrived. Each one thicker, more aggressive. $250 for the gate. $100 for non-compliant landscaping. $75 for unauthorized signage, which turned out to be a small "Beware of Dog" plaque on our fence. It was psychological warfare. I started documenting everything. Photos, emails, meeting transcripts. I created a folder labeled HOA Madness and filled it with evidence. But the more I pushed back, the more they pushed harder. One morning, I woke up to find my trash bins missing. Not tipped over, gone. I called sanitation. They said the HOA had reported them as abandoned property. Then came the noise complaints. We were accused of excessive barking, even though our dog was a 12-year-old golden retriever who barely moved. I knew what they were doing. They wanted to break me down, make me feel isolated. And it worked, at least for a while. Neighbors stopped talking to us. One man who used to lend me his ladder now turned his back when I waved. Another woman, who once complimented our garden, filed a complaint about unauthorized plant species. The gate became a symbol, not just of defiance, but of division. Then came the board meeting. I showed up with a binder full of documentation. I was calm, prepared, ready to speak. They didn't let me. The president, a man named Carl with a permanent scowl and a voice like sandpaper, said I was disruptive. He motioned for security to escort me out. I walked home that night with a fire in my chest. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I spent hours combing through property records, zoning maps, and archived HOA documents. I learned that Willow Creek was built in phases, and my street, Phase 1, had a unique designation. The road in front of my house wasn't technically owned by the HOA. It was a private easement, originally deeded to the developer, but never transferred. And the developer? He'd gone bankrupt years ago, which meant the road was in limbo. I contacted the county, filed paperwork, paid fees. And after weeks of waiting, I got the call. The road was mine. I now owned the strip of pavement that connected the rest of the neighborhood to the clubhouse, the pool, the tennis courts. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Instead, I let the HOA continue their campaign. They issued a final warning. Unlock the gate or face legal action. I framed it, hung it in my garage. Then I made my move. I installed a second gate, this one across the road. Not blocking my driveway, blocking theirs. It was sleek, motorized, and legally permitted. The next morning, chaos erupted. Carl showed up at my door, red-faced and sputtering. "You can't do this," he shouted. I handed him the deed. He stared at it like it was written in another language. "You're bluffing," he said. I wasn't. The board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited. But I watched from my porch as neighbors gathered, confused and angry. Some tried to drive around the gate. Others honked. One woman screamed that she was late for work. Carl tried to rally support, claimed I was holding the community hostage. But the truth was simple. They'd pushed too far. And now they had to ask me for access. I created a permit system. Residents could apply for a gate code, free of charge. But board members? They had to pay $500 per month. Carl refused, said it was extortion. I called it restitution. The board threatened legal action. I welcomed it, because every document, every clause, every zoning map was airtight. They had no case. And as the weeks passed, the power shifted. Neighbors started talking to me again. Some apologized. Others thanked me. Carl resigned. The new board? They were quieter, more reasonable. But the gate stayed. And every time I hear it hum open for a neighbor or slam shut behind a board member, I remember the letters, the fines, the silence. And I smile. Because in Willow Creek, the road to revenge is paved with paperwork. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I was nervous, but because I was ready. For months, the HOA had escalated their campaign. They'd filed a formal complaint with the county, accusing me of obstructing community access. They claimed my gate violated public safety, emergency protocols, and even neighborhood morale. They wanted the road back, but I had something they didn't, the truth. I walked into the county building with a binder thicker than a phone book. Deeds, maps, emails, photos. Every petty fine, every retaliatory act, every clause they twisted to suit their agenda. Carl was already there, flanked by 2 board members and a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The hearing room was small, just a few chairs, a table, and a county official who looked like she'd seen one too many HOA disputes. Carl started strong. He painted me as a rogue homeowner, a threat to community cohesion. He used phrases like hostile obstruction and malicious intent. I let him talk. Then I stood up, opened my binder, and began. I showed the original zoning documents, the easement deed, the bankruptcy records of the developer, the county's own transfer approval. Then I showed the fines, the missing trash bins, the noise complaints, the photos of tire tracks across my lawn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation. The county official leaned forward. So you're saying the HOA has no legal claim to the road? I nodded. Not only that, they've been harassing me for exercising my rights as the legal owner. Carl tried to interrupt. The official held up her hand. I've seen enough. She ruled in my favor. The road was mine. The gate was legal. The HOA had no authority to demand its removal. Carl's face turned the color of wet concrete. But I wasn't done. I stood, looked him in the eye, and said, "You wanted control. You abuse power. Now you'll learn what it feels like to lose it." I walked out of that building with a copy of the ruling in hand and a fire in my chest. But the real moment, the one that would echo through Willow Creek, came 2 days later. The HOA had scheduled a community-wide meeting. They wanted to address the situation. I showed up early, sat in the back, watched as neighbors trickled in, whispering, glancing at me, unsure what to expect. Carl took the podium. He looked tired, defeated, but still clinging to authority. He began with a speech about unity and shared values. Then he tried to spin the ruling, said it was a misunderstanding, and that new negotiations were underway. That's when I stood up. I walked to the front, holding the county's ruling. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said. "It's a reckoning." I read the ruling aloud. Every word. Neighbors gasped. Some cheered. One woman cried. Then I turned to Carl. "You fined me, harassed me, tried to humiliate me. But you forgot one thing. This community isn't yours to control. It belongs to all of us." I handed the ruling to the new board president. Carl had quietly resigned the night before. Then I walked out. But I didn't go home. I went to the gate, and I locked it. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, out of principle. Because sometimes the only way to restore balance is to draw a line no one can cross. And in Willow Creek, that line was paved in asphalt and signed in my name. The next morning, Carl tried to drive through. The gate didn't budge. And for the first time, he had to do what he'd never done before, ask me for permission. The gate stayed locked for 3 days. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted reflection. For the first time in months, there were no letters, no fines, no complaints, just quiet. Neighbors walked by slowly, glancing at the gate, then at me. Some nodded. Others looked away. A few stopped to ask questions. "Is it true?" one man whispered. "You own the road?" I nodded. He didn't say anything else, just smiled and walked on. By the end of the week, the new HOA board reached out. Not with threats, with an invitation. They wanted to meet. I agreed, but on my terms. We sat in my backyard under the lemon trees. No suits, no podiums, just people. They apologized, not just for the gate, but for everything. The fines, the harassment, the silence. I listened. Then I spoke. "This community isn't broken," I said. "It's bruised. And bruises heal when people stop pretending they didn't cause them." They asked what I wanted. I didn't ask for money or power. I asked for change. We rewrote the bylaws. Together. Clause 14b, subsection 3, the one about visual continuity, was removed. We added protections for homeowners facing harassment, a new appeals process, transparency requirements, and most importantly, we added a clause that no HOA member could be fined without a warning, a hearing, and a vote. The gate? It stayed. But now it was symbolic, not of division, of resilience. Neighbors began to reconnect. The woman who once crossed the street to avoid me brought over cookies. The man who ignored my wave helped me fix a broken sprinkler. The community began to breathe again. Carl? He moved out. Quietly. No farewell party. No goodbye. Just a for sale sign and an empty driveway. Some said he was embarrassed. Others said he was angry. I didn't care. Because this wasn't about Carl anymore. It was about every homeowner who'd ever felt powerless. Every resident who'd been silenced. Every person who'd been told they didn't belong in their own neighborhood. I started getting letters. Not from the HOA, but from strangers. People who'd heard the story. Seen the gate. One woman wrote, "I thought I was alone. Thank you for proving we're not." Another said, "I showed your story to my HOA. They backed off." It spread. Not like wildfire. Like roots. Quiet. Steady. Deep. And with every message, I felt something shift, not just in Willow Creek, but in me. I used to think revenge was the goal. But it wasn't. It was justice. And justice doesn't scream. It stands. The gate still hums open every morning. Neighbors pass through. Kids ride bikes. Dogs bark. Life goes on. But every time I hear that gate close behind me, I remember. The letters. The silence. The binder. The ruling. And I smile. Because in a world where power is often abused, sometimes the most radical act is simply saying no. No to intimidation. No to silence. No to being pushed out of your own story. And yes, to standing your ground. So if you're watching this and wondering whether one person can make a difference, remember this. Sometimes all it takes is a locked gate, a little paperwork, and the courage to own the road beneath your feet.